Ever since Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the quality of the Pokemon remakes have been dropping with every new release. Which is not to say that the games are bad, mind you. There are many reasons for that, and in this video I hope to explore my take on said reasons, starting with a small anecdote that perfectly exemplifies what I find the main issue to be. 2004, or 2005 if you're outside of Japan, saw the release of Pokémon Emerald, the definitive version to some of Pokemon's most beloved titles to this day, Ruby and Sapphire. For me, personally, Emerald holds a special place in my heart for having my favorite post-game in the entire series, the Battle Frontier. Kid me spent possibly hundreds of hours trying to make his way through the Battle Pyramid, and having a blast with the rental teams at the Battle Factory, despite being absolutely dreadful at actually using said teams. That's why, when Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were announced in 2014, I was super excited. Sure, I knew I'd have to deal with the dreaded water routes all over again, a fact confirmed later by the now infamous IGN review, but I didn't mind so long as I got to experience the really cool Rayquaza cutscene in glorious 3D graphics and the new and improved Battle Frontier. That was the dream anyway, but instead Game Freak decided to engage in what's quite possibly the most serious case of blueballing in the game industry. They not only didn't include the damn Battle Frontier, but decided to put a stupid building model for, and I quote, the first Battle Frontier facility, the Battle Tower. Like they were saying, haha, look at this thing that you've been wanting again since Gen 4 and have yet to get. Now, let me say, I did enjoy Auras as remakes, even if they didn't include some really cool stuff from Emerald. The Delta episode, as well as giving us ways to easily acquire the Oxys and the Lati duo, were all great additions, to name a couple. And I do also understand that some of you might explain this absence by claiming the games were a remake of the original Ruby and Sapphire, which also didn't have a Battle Frontier, or the Rayquaza cutscene, and, you know, right you are. Except that the originals also lacked a Delta episode, Mega Evolutions, had a whole different Malvo City. I could go on, but I think you get my point. All of these elements are present in Auras, which sorta invalidates the original argument. But I'm hardly here to argue about whether or not specific elements should or shouldn't be in specific games. Instead, I'm here to talk about the big picture. I brought forward the Battle Frontier case because I feel it is a great example of the big problem I see happening with the Pokémon remakes. They simply keep getting worse with each release. And in this video, I'll explain why I think that. Now, I know this might be a bit of a strong statement, so let me clarify it and say that I don't necessarily think any of these remakes are outright bad, it's just that, since Heart Gold and Soul Silver, each has been worse than the last for various reasons, the main of which being cut content from the original generation's third version. And some could argue that Brilliant Diamond and Shiny Pearl are outright bad games, but that's another topic entirely. So what exactly do I mean by getting worse? Well, when it comes to games, lots of factors that determine whether a game is good or bad can be subjective, and as such, what I find bad may actually be something you enjoy. Well, with exceptions of course. Some games are just objectively bad. Sorry, Golem. So instead, I'll just focus on analyzing how much is changing between each game, as well as taking a look at their user reception on Metacritic. And yes, Metacritic is hardly representative of the general fanbase consensus, as Scarlet and Violet became Nintendo's fastest selling title despite a terrible user score on the website, but hey, I can't possibly get the opinion of millions of people, so this slice will have to do. This remake tradition started all the way back in 2004 with Fire Red and Leaf Green. Word on the streets, and really by streets I mean Bulbapedia, is that one of the main purposes for the creation of these games was because Gen 3 onwards lacked backwards compatibility with the previous gens, as there was a shift in console to the Game Boy Advance. One can also speculate that the CV Island served to further alleviate this issue, as they had several Pokémon native to Johto in there. The games were really well received though, and the idea of bringing back older gens with an updated look continued. Honestly, for me, Fire Red and Leaf Green are some of the best remakes around. Yes, it was Kanto again, which was already an issue even back in Gen 3 given we had visited the region in both Gen 1 and 2, but in terms of sheer additions, it was awesome. Some people say that remakes should be very faithful, but especially after the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl debacle, I strongly disagree. If you're gonna remake a game, why not use the opportunity to change it for the better? And that they did. These remakes are arguably the remakes that had the most core game mechanics added to them. I know this might be a bold statement, but hear me out. A lot changed in the game from Gen 1 to Gen 3 with stuff like new Pokémon types, new stat system, breeding, genders, friendship, weather. Oh yeah, and also this tiny new minor feature called abilities. All of those were changes in the franchise, and yes, in Gen 3 we got to experience Gen 1's storyline with all of those incorporated. And not only that, but we also got an expansion to the storyline, the Eevee Islands. As I'm finding out from talking to my friends about this topic, they're not super popular, but every time Kanto gets remade and Eevee Islands aren't included, a piece of me dies. I love them for some reason. So what I'm trying to say is that overall, these remakes were pretty well made. No major content was cut and good additions were made, turning the games into the definitive way to play Gen 1. But most importantly, these remakes established the standard of quality for the series, one that some would argue was even surpassed in 2009 with the release of the series' next remakes, Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Honestly, to this day, lots of people consider these two games to be the gold standard for what a remake should look like. Just like Fire Red and Leaf Green, the games also had a mechanics overhaul, with notably the physical special split and everything else previously mentioned that wasn't already in Gen 2. But they also did so much more. They acknowledged the new Pokémon created since then and gave us a way to find them with Hoenn Sound and Sinnoh Sound. They added Pokeathlon, which had my favorite set of minigames in any Pokémon game ever. New routes, a new super cool Safari Zone, walking Pokémon, the coolest accessory ever in the form of the Pokewalker that made me spend countless hours shaking my leg like an idiot at school, and of course, how could I forget, the Battle Frontier. Albeit the reduced version from Platinum. There were more additions, but I think you get the point. These games hold a special spot in my heart, honestly. The only thing I can possibly fault them for is not bringing back the Eevee Islands, but I'm pretty sure nobody here wanted that but me, so I'll begrudgingly accept that. But I think Heart Gold and Soul Silver deserve extra credits for dealing with an issue that Fire Red and Leaf Green had not dealt with. A third version. You can argue that Gen 1 had Pokémon Yellow as a third version in the West, but the changes are not too big, at least from my research. Story is more or less the same, but you get Jessie and James alongside starting with Pikachu and getting access to all starters. Though Yellow did bring me fond memories of catching an army of Pidgeys to toss at Brock as my Pikachu was ineffective and my dumbass didn't realize monkeys would destroy the guy, it didn't actually fundamentally change things. Crystal, on the other hand, did. Compared to the original Gold and Silver, the game gave us a new female playable character. Suicune has a more prominent role in the story. Visuals were updated, minor details such as showing us the name of the new location we just stepped into were added, amongst others. I'll just show the Boobapedia list on screen to save us all time. So really, if Crystal was arguably the definitive way to experience Gen 2, why did they remake Gold and Silver instead? Money. Money is the most likely answer. Why sell one game if you can sell two, right? But the most important question is, how did they deal with the many improvements brought by Crystal? Turns out in the best possible way. Pretty much everything that was in Crystal made it into these remakes, which became a mix of Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Again, one could argue that it is the definitive way to play Gen 2. The Suicune plotline was all there, everything was all there. Well, except for the odd egg, I guess. Literally unplayable. And that's on top of the other many new additions I mentioned, such as the Battle Frontier, which made everything better. Of course, doing so did take some story adjustments that Game Freak wasn't afraid to tackle, and it paid off. Yes, it could have been made even better if they had fixed Johto's level curve, but honestly, these remakes truly were a labor of love, and they painted a very bright future for the remakes. Or so I thought back then anyway. Fast forward to 2014 and Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were announced and released. The much anticipated remakes to Gen 3 games. They even got a new animated trailer and the beloved new Mega Evolutions. Honestly, these games are still awesome and pretty good. They did a lot of things right, such as bringing all the new game mechanics from Gen 4 onwards into Gen 3's world, including even the Fairy type and Mega Evolutions. They added a way to easily acquire two new beloved legends, the Latiduo and the Oxys. Heck, they even introduced a whole new story sequence with Zinnia and Mega Rayquaza along with the reveal of a damn Pokémon multiverse. It was awesome! But despite everything the games did right, in my opinion they were just held back from greatness and showed a worrying sign for the future, in the form of cut content. See, like Gen 2 had Crystal, Gen 3 also had a definitive version, Emerald. Like the Gen 2 remakes, Gen 3 remakes were also based on the original duology rather than the definitive version. But unlike the Gen 2 remakes, Gen 3 remakes did not incorporate some of the best features of Emerald. Gone was Rayquaza's expanded storyline stopping his two children from fighting. Gone was my beloved Team Magma hideout in Mount Chimney, although I believe I'm the only one mourning its loss. And of course, gone was the beloved Battle Frontier. Now, I understand that some people might claim that Ruby and Sapphire didn't have the Battle Frontier, so why should this? But honestly, these remakes have a lot of new things not present in Ruby and Sapphire, so the argument doesn't hold any water, much to IGN's joy. That being said, don't take this from me, oh no. Take it from an interview Junichi Masuda made to an Italian website back in 2014. I can unfortunately not speak Italian yet, so I'll link it down below for all of you to check it out, as well as a Reddit post that translates the relevant bits. When being asked about Aurus's difficulty, which was deemed easy, they answered, and I quote, "We created a balanced game that was suited for our time and age, where everyone is busy and young people have various means of entertainment. Using smartphones and other devices, they can access a great number of games, so the time they dedicate to a single game is less than in the past. The player can choose to keep on playing after the main story and continue to the post-game, where the difficulty rises and there are much more difficult trainers and challenges to overcome." End quote. So, they made the game easier because they were afraid people would tire of playing. I disagree with the notion, but you know, fair enough. And then the very next question was about why the Battle Frontier is missing. The answer was simply, quote, "It relates to my previous answer. We didn't put the Battle Frontier in for this very reason." End quote. The interviewer then explains in a note that what this likely means is that they believed only a small part of players would have engaged with this feature, as players nowadays get bored and move on more quickly. They get frustrated with challenge. And honestly, what a load of horse shit. Now, we all have to remember that Pokémon is the world's biggest franchise. The people who go online and complain about a lack of Battle Frontier are probably not representative of the over 10 million people who bought the Gen 3 remakes alone, so who knows, perhaps Masuda is right. But it still stings nonetheless, because the players who dislike the content can just, I don't know, not engage with it? It's not like Pokémon has shied away from hard challenges either before or after Aurus was released. I mean, just look at Ultra Necrozma for God's sake, which wasn't even an optional fight. How many little kids do you think were probably left crying because they got steamrolled by this monstrosity? And it's not like Game Freak lacks the money and resources to implement the feature either. I mean, it's not like they're a small indie company, right? But regardless of the reason, the Battle Frontier was indeed cut and we were left with a building model for a facility, just to rub salt in the wound. Again, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were good games. Really good. However, for the first time they chose to cut content that had already been established by other versions, and that trend unfortunately only got worse. Fast forward to 2018 and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee were released. Honestly, this script would have a much better flow if I could have jumped straight to Gen 4 remakes, but they decided to randomly remake Gen 1 again, so here I am. And in fact, that's how lots of fans felt. Kanto again? It's speculated that these were meant to draw in the Pokémon Go crowd, which had exploded and still continues to be very popular even years after its release. For some supporting evidence, one must only look at the gameplay. Pikachu and Eevee literally replaced wild battles with the catching mechanic from Pokémon Go. In fact, that's just how you grind in the game too. I personally had a fun time with the games for what they were, though I understand I'm in the minority here, at least amongst the vocal fans. And critics. But we'll get there soon enough. While they were the first remakes of Pokémon Yellow, the differences in that version to Red and Blue, which Fire Red and Leaf Green remade, weren't too many to begin with, so it wasn't very fresh. Plus, lots of people were thrown off by the art style, the cut mechanic to fight and weaken your wild Pokémon, amongst other issues. And yes, content previously established was again cut in the form of the CV Islands, which I know lots of you don't care about, but damn it, I'll defend those islands to the end of my life. Even the good changes, such as being able to see the wild Pokémon in the overworld, were not enough to offset the vastly different gameplay and visuals for a lot of people, which is understandable. At the end of the day, it's likely that these games were aimed at getting the Pokemon Go only crowd to buy Switches and re-experience the Gen 1 nostalgia in the style they liked and had been playing on their phone. The truth is that Pokemon Let's Go for many people came and went very fast. They, and I include myself in this group, had their eyes on their true prize after all, the inevitable Gen 4 remakes. And in February 27th, 2021, the inevitability came true as Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were announced. Except, the trailer was enough to worry many fans. And these concerns were proven correct in November of 2021 when the games came out to, not too great reviews or user reception. Yikes! I could list a lot of the issues, but I'll focus on the main one. The game was a 1-to-1 remake of Diamond and Pearl. Sure, there were additions such as the expanded underground, but this was the remake that added the least features. And if that was the only problem, it would be a bummer, but not too terrible. But no, instead they went all out on cutting established content. Platinum storyline? Gone. The then reversed world? Gone, save for a teaser. Your resort house you can decorate, called the Chateau I think? Gone. Again, the Battle Frontier. More like Battlefront Gone. Okay, sorry, that was awful. Even tiny quality of life upgrades from Platinum were removed. Are you cycling through your Poketch apps? Better hope you don't accidentally skip the app you want, because this isn't Platinum, there's no back button to rely on. God, it's like they tried to stay as faithful as possible to the original duology and ended up completely failing as remakes in the process. I mean, who gets rid of a back button? Heck, we didn't even get actually updated graphics, we just got a chibi art style that for lots of people is actually worse than the original games. Take a look at this trailer that a fan made and you'll see what lots of people actually wanted. But they weren't content on not bringing Platinum to the table, oh no. They also had to remove great additions to the franchise since Gen 4, such as the reusable TMs. Honestly, I would go on about the games, but I think there's a much better video that analyzes everything that could have gone better here. I'll link it in the description. All I'll say is that, as it stands, I honestly don't see a reason to play these remakes over just replaying Platinum. And even Let's Go managed to give us a reason to play those instead of Fire Red and Leaf Green in the form of a new catching system. Love it or hate it. So now that we've gotten to the end of the list, I hope you understand what I mean when I say the remakes have been progressively getting worse. They're not bad by any means, but Fire Red and Leaf Green, alongside especially Heart Gold and Soul Silver, set a standard of excellence that just hasn't been met since. That's why I would say, considering how much more content is cut with each remake, that they keep getting worse. With Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl being arguably the very first alt-right bad remakes, depending on who you ask. And it seems at least the Metacritic vertical slice of the user base agrees. Take a look at the screen right now. You can see how each game progressively got worse in terms of user score. There are, of course, many reasons for this, but I genuinely think that the main one boils down to how much content gets removed with each attempt at a remake, after the originals established that they can, and are, or were, willing to make remakes that actually blend the best of all versions. So now I guess the question that burns in our minds is, why? Why do these remakes keep getting more and more faithful, I guess you could call them, or lazy? I'll leave the terminology up to how much faith you want to have in Game Freak. One may point to Pokemon's yearly release cycle as perhaps the most obvious culprit. They have a strict policy, or so it seems anyway, and must have a new game or DLC out every year. This meant that even if ILCA, the developers behind Gen 4 remakes, wanted more time to work on the game, there is a possibility that they would not have been able to, or were not able to, get said time. Of course though, we can only speculate as we have no way of knowing for sure what happens inside the Pokemon Company and Nintendo. Another possible explanation is that everyone behind the Pokemon IP is just woefully out of touch with its fan base. They think we want something when in reality we want the complete opposite. And in fact, that can already be seen with Masuda's explanation on why they didn't add the Battle Frontier to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I mean, seriously, most people wouldn't want the challenge. But again, I have no way to know for a fact that they are out of touch. I mean, most of those millions and millions of people who buy each game don't go on Reddit to talk about them. They just enjoy the games with their kids or whatever. So maybe their claim is correct, although I really doubt it. And the last thing I can think of is that they honestly just don't care. Every new game breaks sales records regardless of whether or not they reuse animations from 3DS games, cut content to focus on animating Pokémon, have massive frame drops, etc. And honestly, as one of those people that buy every single game, I can understand why they sell well. The core is still, and likely always will be, extremely fun. Catching creatures that you've come to know and love in the past 25 plus years, pitting them against each other until one of them passes out from the trauma is just good plain fun, even if the rest of the games have issues in many areas. So if they keep this fun core and people keep buying, why bother with some of these extra features? Again, this is all just speculation, and I hope this last one isn't it, because it will just show a complete lack of love for the franchise. All I know is that if someone tries to go the Xenia route and claim that the remakes we got with less features and cut content are just alternate dimensions in which these things never existed, I'll tell them to go pound a sandy gas or something. It makes sense in lore, but it's not a justification for the lack of features, come on people! And while we might be tempted to give Game Freak, the Pokémon company, Nintendo a break because the games are still fun, I just wanted to remind you all that Pokémon is the most profitable franchise ever! Across all media. There's really no excuse for any measure made to cut costs, such as, again, reusing the 3DS animations for Sword and Shield, especially after claiming the Pokédex was cut to work on things such as sad animations. But that being said, there's hope for us yet. If the main content that's been getting cut is that of a third version of any given generation's games, it stands to reason that the issues minimized when the generation being remade does not have a third game to draw content from. Right? Absolutely. And wouldn't you know, as we just got our Gen 4 remakes, there is a pretty good possibility that the next games to be remade are Gen 5's Black and White, which got full-on sequels in the form of Black and White 2, instead of a third version. But this is Game Freak we're talking about, so who knows? Perhaps we'll not get a remake of Black and White 2 at all. And do note as well that I mentioned that the issues minimized but not entirely removed. A massive chunk of the missing content in previous remakes has been from the third game in each generation, but there's always more that can be removed. If you need examples, just look again at Shining Pearl and Brilliant Diamond and how they removed some well-established improvements such as reusable TMs. But then again, Scarlet and Violet kept this change, so not even entirely new games are safe from this issue. And keep in mind, this is just an example. If you're one of the folks who think TMs should be single use, all the power to you. You masochist. Just kidding. Maybe. But the fact is that not even long-established improvements are safe from change, and as such, a potential Gen 5 remake is definitely prone to suffering from these issues. But at least in theory, it won't be as terrible as in Gen 4, as there's no third version for Game Freak to ignore. Please, devs, don't prove me wrong. Another path for the future that I honestly like more than flat-out remakes is to give us side games in the same region, such as Legends Arceus, a game that helped soften the blow from the weirdness that was the Gen 4 remakes, because at least we got to see the region again in some form and learn its history. The obvious path to go in Gen 5 with this idea is to give us a story again far in the past, but this time involving the original dragon before it was split into Zekrom and Reshiram. Just put us right into the middle of the conflict to see the tale of the two brothers, or even make us one of the brothers. Similarly, one could also make Gen 6 side games in the same vein. For all of X and Y's many faults, I was thoroughly interested in the big war that resulted in AZ creating the ultimate weapon and firing it. We'd get to witness the start of a Mega Evolution phenomenon, and Pokémon would even have a chance to be a bit more grim of its storyline, as that time period involved a lot of death, destruction, and really no happy ending for anyone involved. Even AZ, the winner, who was cursed to walk Kalos for millennia without ever reconnecting with his Floette friend. Until we intervened anyway. Of course, Game Freak would never go outright grim with the storyline, but oh well, fun to dream and all. All I'm saying is Game Freak, the Pokémon Company, the powers that be, they don't have to give us remakes to make us revisit past regions, as proven by the success that was Legends Arceus. And honestly, if Gen 4 remakes are any indication of the quality we're getting from now on, then perhaps it's for the best if we just get new adventures in previous regions. One last thing I want to mention is that I actually left out one remake from my video, mostly because it's a spin-off. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX. It was actually pretty good, really. Some folks still prefer the originals, but the remake introduced lots of neat changes from later on in the series, as, you know, in my belief, a remake should. The IQ system got reworked, you can pick your starter with the personality test only being a suggestion. Fairy type, Mega Evolutions, and other new features from the main games are all in, amongst other changes. Some cool, a few not so cool. But most importantly, as far as I'm aware, there was no real cut content, especially because there was no third version. The next games in the series though are Explorers of Darkness and Time, which had the third version called Explorers of Sky. Honestly, Game Freak, Pokémon Company, Nintendo, if you decide to remake Darkness and Time and not put in anything related to Sky, we are throwing hands. I mean, I'm obviously losing, because I'm just one guy, but still. Honestly though, it's no wonder that Rescue Team DX fared a bit better. I've always been very fond of the Pokémon spin-offs, nowadays even more so than the mainline games. Pokémon Ranger has to this day been a unique experience in my gaming history. Explorers of Sky remains as one of the very few games that managed to make me cry. Heck, I even got enjoyment out of the stupid DS game called Pokémon Dash. Anyone remember that? Though this last one I definitely do not hold in higher regard than any mainline game, I just wanted to tell people I played it. Anyway, to sum it up, I think the one big problem the remakes have is that they keep cutting content that the games absolutely need. If an improvement was made, if there's a better version around, there's no sense to remaking outdated versions. Sure, you can argue that it's because they want the money from releasing two versions, and probably, but Heart Gold and Soul Silver managed to split the game in two while still incorporating everything from Crystal, so there's really no excuse here. But as I said, we're going into Gen 5 now, which didn't have a third version, and we've also gotten an experience in the Gen 4 regions past with Pokémon Legends Arceus, so I can at least say that the future can hold very interesting things. Emphasis on can. Who knows if the powers that be will actually deliver. That being said, I would love to hear your thoughts on the subject. Do you think the remakes are getting worse? Do you perhaps think this is a symptom of a bigger issue and that all Pokémon games are getting worse? Do you think all is well? And for all of these questions, why? At the end of the day, I chose to make this video because I feel like this is interesting to talk and think about, so I want to hear all of you. Even if all you have to say is that I'm 100% wrong and that I should feel bad. My feelings will be very hurt, but you know, I'll survive. And hey, if you did enjoy hearing my thoughts and want to see more of what goes on in my chaotic mind, check out my other video on Pokémon about whether or not Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon ruined Lusamine's character. Thank you so much for popping by, and I'll catch you hopefully in the next video. Bye bye!